A lot of your kids with dyslexia need up to 40 times exposure to it. And I often think, how many times I'm like, okay, I've done this 35 times, I'm done. Or we got to 39. You have to be patient because they're not choosing to not learn it. They're not choosing to. So now that we know what some of the characteristics are, and you're like, okay, I think we may have dyslexia. What do you do about it? Well, first thing, even though a child is homeschooled, under federal law, schools must evaluate kids who may need special education services. Now, I will say, just because a child has dyslexia does not mean they would qualify for special ed by any means. But if there is a parent who is concerned about their child and they go to the school that their child is zoned for, they have to do testing. And there, you have to be careful about how you say it. Now, I can only speak for Tennessee, and I know we've got people from all over the country. But in Tennessee, if you go to the school and say, will you test my child for dyslexia? They're going to say, no, we don't do that. But if you go and say, hey, will you screen my child for characteristics of dyslexia? Sure, we can do that. It's in the wording. So if you are in a state other than Tennessee, I would definitely look at your Department of Education website to see what they say to do. You can also find different groups on Facebook, the Decoding Dyslexia. There's one in almost every state. The International Dyslexia Association has a branch in almost every state. And if you're not sure on what to do, contact them and they can set you in the right direction. But it comes down to the wording. And even though your school system, your state has a dyslexia law, it doesn't mean that the person you're talking to at school understands the dyslexia law. I still hear from parents, teachers, administrators, the different stories about, do we test, do we not test? And I'm like, if you look at the dyslexia law, you do screen for characteristics. And so not everybody knows. And it's frustrating as a parent when you're going to ask for help and the people who you think might be able to help you, they don't understand it either. It is very frustrating. But as I've gone through all this with dyslexia, you don't know what you don't know. So some people just don't know. And really, until it becomes personal, they don't go investigating about it. I had been teaching 15 years and never read a book on dyslexia. I never did any professional development because it didn't affect me. I was looking at other stuff about reading, not necessarily dyslexia specific. But when my daughter was diagnosed and I learned more about it, I thought, whoa, I know several of the students I really could have helped if I had just known about it. Because schools do not always send you to training. All the training I have received came out of my own pocket. And I don't mind doing it because it was for my child. But knowing what I have paid and the hours I have spent would be very difficult to do for somebody else's child. Even though as a teacher, I love those kids like my own, but it's still hard to put all that money into it. So it became personal, and that's how I got started on this. Like I said, you can contact the International Dyslexia Association, and they may not, because as president of Tennessee, if someone asks me a question who lives in one of the very rural areas of Tennessee that I don't even know where it is in Tennessee, I can connect them with somebody in that area who is more familiar and who can recommend some names if someone chooses not to go through the school system. A licensed educational psychologist can do the testing, or one who has taken required courses and is trained in assessing students. When I do an assessment, I can only tell the parent if the child has characteristics of dyslexia or not. If you're thinking maybe developmentally delayed or autism or ADHD, I can't do that. I'm number 4. That's where I am with all my training. But a lot of times you'll hear them say, oh, we've got to get an IQ test. IQ has nothing to do with dyslexia. Most people who have characteristics of dyslexia have very high IQs. And what I think is so interesting and important for everyone to know, you can be gifted and dyslexic. You can be both because they're not related to each other. Albert Einstein had characteristics of dyslexia. We think, oh, he was so smart. Yeah. Those with dyslexia are very smart. It just comes down to that reading component that they struggle with. So then once your child is screened, what do you do next? I highly recommend getting a tutor who is trained, or I prefer certified, in a dyslexia specific intervention. And the reason why is I can go to a one-day workshop and I'm, quote, trained. If you are certified in a dyslexia specific intervention, it has probably taken you months to get certified in it. So you have very thorough knowledge of what is needed. And it's not always just going to a retired teacher. There are things that I have learned going through my training I had no idea about as a teacher. And so going through that, I was able to gain more knowledge, and this is why the child is doing it. Now let's see what we can do to help them undo bad habits or help with their weaknesses. Now, one thing you need to make sure you're doing is document what you're doing to help your child at home. And I know, speaking from someone who has been in the school system, who has worked with kids who have later taken the ACT, to get accommodations on the ACT, not only do you have to prove that there's a learning difference, you have to prove that accommodations have been made this whole time. You can't just go and say, here's my documentation. I have dyslexia, so I need extra time. Because they're going to say, have you had extra time on your other test? So if you read the test to your child, document it. If you give your child extra time on a test, document it. If you use a multiplication chart or a calculator on tests due to not knowing their facts, document it. Now, I'm not saying every single time, you have a spiral that, oh, I read the English test. Oh, I read the spelling test. Oh, I read the social studies test. But these are the things that are going on. Because like I said, you've got to have proof that there is a learning difference and that accommodations have been used this entire time. And so now we know there may be characteristics. We know we can get them some help. And as a parent, my thing is, what do I do? How can I help? Start working with your child where they are, not where they should be. Just because your child is in 6th grade, like I have on the screen, they might not be able to read and understand that. So if you keep giving them 6th grade work, you're not going to get too far with that. If their reading comprehension is at a 3rd grade, start at a 3rd grade. Build up on it. Because when you have someone who doesn't understand the vowel patterns or syllable types, doesn't know there are sight words, you're going to get a lot of guessing. And what happens with a lot of the kids is they're guessing a couple of times and they get it right. So they keep on guessing. But they need to learn how to sound out the word, how to break them apart into the syllables to know, is it an open syllable or a closed syllable? Now, just because they're reading and understanding on a 3rd grade level, that doesn't mean your 6th grader needs to do 3rd grade math. That doesn't mean your 6th grader needs to do 3rd grade science and social studies, because their listening comprehension is going to be much, much higher. So are you wanting them to read, or you want them to understand content? If you want them to understand content, science and social studies, do it online. If you're wanting them to do listening comprehension, all that can be done online. It can be oral. So you can kind of your curriculum can kind of curtail to what your child needs and not just, oh, well, they're on third grade in reading, so we're going to do third grade with everything. That's not what they need. When you're working with your kid, you always teach to the intellect. You teach to where they are and build up on that. Look for a reading or phonics curriculum that is systematic and cumulative. Means it should start with the easiest concept and move to more difficult skills. Each step must be based on previous concepts learned. Think about it. If your child does not know how to multiply, you're not going to jump them in a curriculum that starts with division. You have to have multiplication under control or know how to use it to do the division. So when you're reading, you need to start with the most simple thing and build on that. And make sure they have mastered one part before you build on to too much more. So that it needs to be systematic and in an order. And I know I get this question all the time. What curriculum should I use? It's whatever works best with your child. If you have 3 kids, you may have 3 different curriculums because each one is different. And when it comes down to, it's not the curriculum that teaches the child, it's the teacher, it's the parent, it's the one who's given the instruction. So make sure it's something that is systematic and it is cumulative. When you're working with your child, use all the learning modalities. They need to see it, say it, hear it, do it all at the same time. I do a lot of air writing. When we write words, we write in the air. We say the letter, we say the sound. We, when they're younger, they can write on sandpaper and shaving cream and things like that. But that's very important. They need to use all their senses. And if you can bring in taste, go for it. If you're working with words with DGE and you're going to have fudge one day, making that connection is very important. Make your lessons go together. I taught in a school system for several years that we had no curriculum. And it was awful and it was hard, but it was the best thing I ever did. So what we would do is we would look at phonics. What are we going to work on this week? If let's say we're going to work on AI, AY. Well, then that's what I worked on in phonics. My spelling list came from words with that. Then my passage that we read came from those list of words. And you need to start with decodable. I know they're like, oh, but I want my child on first grade reading level, so I'm going to give them first grade books. A lot of those books are not decodable. And when I say decodable, I'm meaning that a child can look at it and they have already been taught the vowel teams that are going to be used in the passage. When you start giving them vowel teams they've not been exposed to, that's when they start guessing. And please do not tell them to look at the picture and see if it helps you. That's when kids get into third grade and they hit that wall. There's not a lot of pictures in chapter books. So they've got to be able to sound out their words, but kind of make all of this go together. When they're writing, give them a list of AI and AY words that they can use over and over. Another thing is if your child understands the math concept, but hasn't mastered their facts, give them a calculator. If you're going to do all these processes and they get stuck because they don't know what 7 times 7 is, do they not know how to do the problem or do they miss one step? They missed one step. So just give them the calculator. And it's so funny because I remember in school, oh, you're not going to have a calculator with you all the time. Yeah, we do. So teach them how to use it the right way. Look at the big picture. What does your child need to know to be a productive member of society? Skip all that other fluff. You know what your child needs and what they don't need. I will be honest, there were times when I was teaching in the school system, and when a kid goes, when am I going to use this? Stop and think, because I'm thinking, never. unless you teach this grade. So think about what's the most important thing and teach them that. And you can leave out some of the parts of it. If you're teaching about, let's say World War I, it's important to know what caused it, who won, what was the outcome, but every single little detail, they don't have to know. That's just too much. You go with what's most important. Other things you can do to help your child when you're doing your spelling and phonics, explicitly teach the pattern. Assume nothing. Even though you may have talked about a certain vowel pattern, make sure you say, okay, show them here's an A, here's an I. AI together says A. Don't assume that they already know it. Because as soon as you assume something, it's going to get you. Teach the spelling rules. Give them the why. Why do I need to put an AI here instead of an AY? And I'll be honest with you, most adults don't know why we spell words the way we do. I have gone to many workshops and given presentations, and sometimes I'll just flat out ask, why is there an E at the end of give? And of course, like, oh, it makes the I say it's, oh, no, I doesn't say its name in give. The reason an E is at the end is because words in English don't end with a V. Just like they have to have the E on the end, just like mouse, house. Why is there an E on it? Because if you don't have that E, you just have a S, house looks like more than one how. Mouse looks like more than one mow. Even when I ask them, how do I know when to use a C or a K? A lot of adults have to think about, when do you use a C or a K? Well, but when you teach the kids, a C is followed by an A, O, U, or consonant. A K is by an I, E, or a Y. Then they know when to use that instead of misspelling the words the whole time. Because chances are, if they have a choice between two letters, they're always going to pick the wrong one. I feel like that never failed. If they knew it was between these two, but they didn't know which one because they didn't know the rule behind it or the why behind it. I know sometimes when parents are working with kids, they have them practice writing their words several times, maybe 3 times each. Don't do that because a lot of times they're writing the words 3 times wrong. So I would have them, or I would write it with a highlighter and have them trace over the word. You can tell if a letter's been traced 3 or 4 times because the lines are kind of a little wiggly. But that way they're writing it the way it's supposed to be written instead of misspelling it all the different times. Practice air writing. I'm all about air writing. I think it's very important. It makes that connection with the brain. See it, say it, hear it, do it. If they're going to air write it, what letter are you writing? What sound goes with it? What's the word? Make it all connect. Definitely with reading, you start with decodables. I know a lot of times we're like, oh, let's read Dr. Seuss books. Those books are not easy to read. Maybe Hop on Pop and Green Eggs and Ham, but a lot of those, as an adult, when I've read them in class, I get, a little jumbled on them because they don't make sense because a lot of nonsense words. But they need books and passages that are decodable to where if you've not taught them the vowel pattern, it's not in the passage. And there's several different links I'm going to send out later where you can find free decodable books. Explicitly teach children how to break words into syllables. And I know we say, oh, it's when your chin drops. Guys, that did not work on me. I could tell you what the word is, but to know how to break it into a syllable, I had a difficult time. I didn't know until my late 30s exactly how to split a word into syllables. How you break it with the, if you've got 2 consonants, you can break it between those or an open and close. I didn't know that. But it's important that they know how to break words into syllables. Do not tell your child to look at the picture to figure out the word. I see a lot of times the parents like, oh, they're reading the book. I see a cat. I see a balloon. You mean your child just read balloon? No, they looked at the picture and knew that had to be a balloon. And so because it worked, they're going to try it on the next word that they don't know. Make sure they're sounding out their words. Listen to books online or CD. That's wonderful for the students. If you're wanting to know, if you're doing a chapter book with your child and you're wanting to know, are they understanding the story? Listen to it online. You can Google almost every book and you can find it somewhere online. Give them a bookmark or something to place under the words. You know, we talked about how sometimes it looks like it's moving. This kind of keeps it grounded and it helps the child not lose their place. And a lot of times I'll tell them, point to the word, but then there will come a time you don't want them to point. You want your finger to flow the whole time as they're reading. Then as it's starting to flow, you'll start to teach them how to read in phrases. If it's the cow jumped over the moon, you can do the cow jumped over the moon. Because if not, it's going to be the cow jumped over the moon. And it's going to be robotic, and we don't talk that way. We talk in phrases. Our voices change as we read. If a child has a hard time understanding how to keep everything organized, because kids are like, oh, I don't need to keep my math organized. I'm like, handwriting is important in math also, so you can line up things in their place value. Turn your paper sideways. You've got those blue lines on the paper. Just turn it sideways and you can line things up by their place value. Use the multiplication chart. If you've gone through the times tables and they're still having trouble, there comes a time you've got to move on to the next skill. So use the multiplication chart, because if they have to look up my worst one, 8 times 7. I looked that up so many times. But after a while, I didn't have to look it up anymore. They're able to start remembering that. When you use decimals, put them in red so they can visually see it. If they happen to be one where their letters are jumping off the page, can y'all imagine what that decimal is doing? It's all over the place. So they have to ground it and make sure they can really see it. Teach them how to check their numbers before they work out their problems. Sometimes if they're copying a problem from the book, if it's 32, they might write 23. Just kind of getting in the habit of double checking. You will have to remind them several times of the steps in working out problems. In division, you will have to remind them because it doesn't make sense, because here, like think about when you divide, it's like this number goes into this number, then you put an answer here, then you multiply it here, then you put an answer here, then you bring something down. It's all over the place. So you might have to remind them over and over again. If you're working with your own child, or if you're having a co-op and you're doing the instruction for a small group, provide notes for the student. If they're having a hard time copying off the board because they're misspelling everything or they're not getting all their notes, it does them no good to study because they're not learning what you're actually teaching them. Give notes with a graphic organizer. Make it to where they can see it visually. One thing I have really enjoyed doing is with some of the kids that I work on one-on-one, when we're looking at what they've covered in their class in, let's say, science, instead of writing all the words everywhere, draw me a picture of what that means. And once they have drawn a picture, because I'm focusing on their talent. A lot of times our students with dyslexia, they are very talented in the art field. So a lot of them enjoy drawing. So when they're drawing pictures of what they're doing, or when we were talking about some of the wars, we drew pictures of all the different things that happened. The students were able to tell me much better what was going on because those pictures made a connection than all the words. They felt like with the words, they had to memorize it, but with the picture, they could tell about it. And if you are working with several kids, let's say, again, a co-op, and you're giving them a test, give them a study guide. They'll say read chapter 1 and we're going to have a test over it, because they are so unorganized in certain ways. They don't even know where to start. And I don't know about you, but sometimes if I don't know where to start something, I may not start it. I'll put it off and not do it. Here are some free online resources. If you've got a young child who is still learning their letters and sounds, Lililo is great. And again, these are free. Now you can always do the paid version, but I'm cheap and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use the free version. And so these are different things you can play, different games to help with review, to help with extra instruction, with reading comprehension. A lot of times I hear parents talk about, I just don't know for sure if my child is understanding what they're reading. I don't know where to start them on grade level. The Read Theory website, that can help you know where to start. ReadWorks is great for different passages. Get Epic. It is books online where they can just listen to it. I strongly disagreed with a teacher at one time because she's like, oh, this kid's in 2nd grade, so he only needs to be listening to 2nd grade books. This child loved everything about sharks. Because he was actually my student. So, and he would go to her for reading, but came back to me. I was like, you pick any book you want to on sharks. I don't care what the level is with you listening to it. Guess who knew tons of stuff about sharks? He did. But if he was only exposed to one level, he wasn't going to get the depth of knowledge that he has now. So these are some really good resources. Math, you've got games online. Splash Learn, which is with the math and the ELA, it actually goes by different standards. That if you're working on adding fractions, here's some games about adding fractions. So it has different things that they can use other than paper and pencil all the time. And some of these have a kind of instruction type, and then you play a game with it, and then you have more instruction, and it's a game. So it kind of goes back and forth. So it's not just games all the time or instruction with that. And different ways, different manipulatives you can use. But when it comes down to it, teaching your child, you are the parent. You know what's best for your child. You are the teacher. You know how your child learns best. If your child needs to stand on their head and give you their spelling words, let them do it. Because that's what they need, and you know that's what they need. You are the one in charge of educating them. Don't feel like you have to be like everybody else. Well, this person's doing this with this child. You know what's best for your child. So do what you know is best to get them where they need to be. So that was a lot.
That's a lot of information, but I love it. You brought some perspectives. When we started, there was nothing. We didn't have anything, and I'd had, it was really my child 5 that we began to see a lot of what you described, and there wasn't anybody to ask, or there weren't testing back then. You didn't even really test your kids ever. And so the test is really up to you, whether you feel like that's going to help bring clarity to you. Whether you test or not, you can still tell if your child needs to be accommodated a different way. And there is a real difference between special ed and accommodations. A lot of times
Yes.
Parents will say, well, they're in special ed because they're dyslexic. And I go, no. I said, because they are able to learn. They're really smart. Like she was saying, that our daughter is super smart, and anything you gave her audio visually, she could remember and actually had a longer retention of information. I started researching retention of information. What can I do to increase this child's, and realize that they know statistically that if they only read and take tests and are lectured to, their long-term retention is about 5 to 10% of that information. And yet we live in a society that says, if you read and take tests well, you're smart. But that's really not accurate. You really don't retain your best information doing that. But if you do, like Jennifer was saying, hands-on, audiovisual, field trips, demonstrations, and they can verbally tell you what they know, the retention goes to about 90%. And I began to realize every child really needed this way of learning and teaching. It's not just limited to a dyslexic child. So I know in my webinar that I did on Don't Stress Out Over High School, a lot of the resources that I use in there are great for dyslexic kids but they're great for any kids for increasing that retention of information. And so it was interesting, that there's exceptions to every rule, like I've got, parents that'll say, yeah, my kids are, didn't like Barton. Some people love Barton, and I'm seeing a whole lot of stuff popping up here about, what was it? My screen keeps moving, but there's other reading programs that they are, that they're talking about that help. So if you find something that works for your student, do it. I love that you said we don't have to follow anybody else's pattern. Jennifer Post, did you see anything on there that you'd like for us to address while you've got some questions up there?
On the questions, I did see several on both the difference or similarities between dyslexia and ADHD and dyslexia and autism. There were quite a few on there on both of those, like, do they go together? Are they completely different? I mean, is ADHD or autism, connected to dyslexia?
Yes.
Yes.
What happens a lot of times is when you have students who are starting to struggle, you can have dyslexia and have ADHD. And sometimes we have a hard time knowing which is which, because is it you're having a hard time focusing, or is it because you're having a hard time understanding what is going on? And I will say, we notice it, sometimes like, oh, boys have this more than girls do. No, they don't. Boys, when they're not understanding what's going on in what you're working with them on, they're going to start fidgeting, they're going to start playing, they're going to start doing all those other things. Sometimes the girls just kind of sit there and are quiet. But you can have both. A lot of kids with dyslexia do have ADHD, but it doesn't mean if you have ADHD, you have dyslexia. And as far as autism, that's different components of the brain. And so sometimes that has to do with a little bit of, could be some damage to the brain. And I'll be the first to tell you, I'm not an expert when it comes to autism. I'm still learning. I just met with a gentleman just this week, and he was suggesting some books to read on autism, just because I do get questions like that. And that way I can understand more of that side of it.
So some of the, one of the program I was trying to come back to my mind that I saw pop up in the chat quite a bit was all about reading, or all about learning. Have you used that before? And I'm hearing a lot of good responses about that.
I personally have not used that. Because I was an educator, my programs are more what is endorsed by the International Dyslexia Association, where you have other curriculums that are not so much, it's a curriculum, but the training that comes with it is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. But I have had some use that really like it. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to, I have some programs that I think are doing really well. For one that has just come out is called UFLI from the University of Florida Literacy Institute. It's really good. It has where you can get, like, it starts off, it's very systematic and it's very cumulative. It has basically your lesson online. Even though you're the instructor of it, it has everything you need. It has decodable passages. It has explanations on how to write the letters. It has explanations on how to sound out the letters. The only thing, I think the book costs $75. Everything else with it is free.
Nice.
And that's a really good one that if I didn't have my training in all my specialized areas, that's probably something I would use.
And you'll put that resource for the families. You can.
Yes,
go
I'm
to.
gonna create all the links and send
Okay.
those out if that's okay.
Okay. Jennifer, did you see anything else coming out that you wanted to ask?
We had a few questions about both children that we would discover they were dyslexic while in high school, and how do we start them now, and also about being that they're in high school and now we understand they're dyslexic, how do the process of going through for ACT accommodations.
And we deal with that a lot on our
Yes.
side. HomeLife does have an ACT person that helps you with those accommodations. But what Jennifer was saying about the sooner you can document that something was going on, that you can go back and document that this child's had to have audiobooks, or they've had to be read to, or they've had to have more time for tests. The ACT is getting more where they want to see that progression over a period of time. Now, obviously, you can't just get to high school and suddenly be dyslexic. It's probably just not been noticed, and it's been kind of accommodated for. I probably have dyslexia, but I accommodated myself a lot. Growing up, we didn't even have recorded books, but I would go in my room and read all my books out loud to myself. I could read, but I would not retain the information if I did not hear it audibly. And so it was a lot of things I just learned to do to accommodate myself. So very easily covered up. I was a straight A student, but I realized I had a lot of those things she would talk about. I'm like going, oh my goodness. But I learned to figure out what made work. So that's what we did with our daughter, was we just like, okay, you don't learn that way. So what way are you going to learn? And let's figure out how you learn. So I often tell parents, when you're getting a child through homeschooling or any kind of education, and I love that you talked about them being a responsible adult. I'm raising adults, not children. You do want them to love to learn. And if they hate it because they're only given the read a book, take a test kind of learning, then they won't develop that love for learning. But if you do the other things, they can develop a love for learning, because they're going to have to learn the rest of their life.
Mm-hmm.
Know how they learn. If you're a person that can read a book and remember everything was in that book, that's going to be a lot different than a child that does not even want to read a book because it's such misery. But they also need to have a work ethic. They need to know how to problem solve. I look at Edison and Einstein, who they think had those dyslexic characteristics, but yet they were incredible problem solvers.
Mm-hmm.
And we know them because of that. And so those are things that are most valuable, not whether you taught them every fact out of a book, but do they love to learn and know how to learn their way? And that makes a huge difference in that. So,
Well, and in high school, if you're starting to notice that there's some challenges, you can still get them screened, get them tested. I had one parent contact me and they're like, well, they're a sophomore, so it's too late. I'm like, until they walk across that stage of graduation, it is not too late. That they can still get screened for characteristics of dyslexia. So depending on what state they're in, I highly recommend looking at the handbook, the dyslexia handbook for their state, also to make sure they do have a dyslexia law. There are some states that still do not have a dyslexia law. And so with those, I don't know what to tell you.
Well, there's a lot of colleges now that are realizing they're missing out on a lot of great students, because most dyslexic children are incredibly intelligent. And so that's another reason to have those test scores. Like I said, when we came through, we didn't have that. But when our daughter got college age, she realized there was a lot of accommodations she could get in college if she had that diagnosis. That's something that's told that. And so it's kind of a more accepted thing to be able to get somebody that will pick up on those characteristics, and maybe they can get that extra help to make them to be successful. But I also just think if they're really determined, they're going to do whatever God's called them to do.
Absolutely.
Somebody asked a question I just saw pop up here. It said, how about children that are bilingual? Have you ever dealt with bilingual children? She said, do they just teach one language at a time or at the same time? And I can only imagine we struggled enough with English I can imagine if we're trying to do bilingual with dyslexia. So that might be
Yeah.
something she might want to just reach out to you personally to brainstorm
Yes,
some
please
ideas for
do.
that.
I cannot think of the book right offhand, but Dr. Elsa Hagen has written a book about working with children um, who are English language learners or those who are learning multiple languages. I can picture, here's a word recall. I can picture her book. It is orange, but yeah, absolutely.
Just
Reach out to me. I can,
reach
yeah.
out to Jennifer. She'll be able to help it. Jennifer Post, did you see anything else there that you wanted to ask us?
Several people have asked questions, which I'm assuming you're going to post later, but about online resources for parents to help them learn how to teach their children and how to help them.
Absolutely. Yep, she's going to get those up there for you. And then I was glad that you touched on math, because we usually tie dyslexia just to reading, but I talked to lots and lots of parents, and I would say a high majority of the time that they have a hard time memorizing math facts. Like if I asked my daughter what's 8 times 5, she'd lift up her fingers and go 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. She understood the concept, but her brain didn't just say 5 times 8 is 40. And so I loved it that you touched on that you would be able to so I have a great program I can share too, that the first thing he does is teach them how to use a calculator so that they can go on and learn higher level math without. And even the gentleman that wrote the program even pointed out to me that every time they use that calculator and put in 8 times 5 and they see 40, that the brain is it'll eventually could stick. And so it could actually help them get better and better as they go along. But it definitely took out the misery of that. And a lot of times they don't write really neat. And so again, you've got the issues with lining up stuff. And so, that helps that too. So it really is a neat, if you need that resource, let me know. But when they were little, we did the best we could trying, but there was a certain point we had to say, okay, that's not in your brain. I used to say you didn't get that brain cell to do that. And it was okay. And I realized when you showed those pictures of the brain, I went, oh yeah, she probably her brain isn't wired that way,
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. So yeah.
One thing I definitely want to encourage the parents, when you have a typical learner, most times they see things about 10 times and they get it. A lot of your kids with dyslexia need up to 40 times exposure to it. And I often think, how many times I'm like, okay, I've done this 35 times, I'm done. Or we got to 39. Or, it's just, you have to be patient, because knowing that their brain is wired that way, they're not choosing to not learn it. They're not choosing to misspell the word. It's just, you have to be patient. I always joke with my daughter, God gave me you for a reason. And we talk about how her being diagnosed with dyslexia has gotten us to where we are now. And I personally feel like it's a calling for me. It is a mission. And I know in the Bible, it tells us to go out and preach the gospel to others. I want you to read it for yourself. Don't take what I'm saying. I want everybody to be able to read. So that's been my passion, is helping everybody and letting the parents know, guys, this is a journey. And there are days it's hard. It is really hard. You're going to give up, and it's okay. But take a deep breath and try it again the next day. And just keep going, because you are their advocate. You are their voice. You're the one in charge.
Well, we have skimmed the surface today and really hopefully given you some encouragement that you're not in this alone, that maybe there's some things your kids have done, you think, oh, they're not strange. This is just the way they learn. But I hope you guys will, when this comes out and it's published on the HomeLife Academy webinars, I hope you'll go back and read the chats. I want to find out if they're going to be included, because I keep hearing some incredible ideas and things coming through the chats, because you're a bunch of smart people out there and dealing with these children. You've got all these creative ideas, and just don't be afraid to do whatever works for your child. And that's okay. It's totally good. And so I'm so proud of all of you guys. I just want to tell you, just keep in the game if you need us. HomeLife has a full counseling team that can help you. If you need Jennifer, she's offering her help and assistance. So, and our Jennifer Post is on here with us because she lived with this for many years with her children. So we are here to help you. And so I hope you have a blessed day and reach out to us.